Good to go, I'm being told. So welcome to this webinar entitled China's Labor Challenges, another one in our long series of events, webinars and physical network meetings and so forth, where we look into what's happening in China right here and now and what can we expect in the future. Of course, always with a specific emphasis on the impact on the Danish business sector, but we are always happy and pleased to get people representing from companies from outside China as well. So welcome to all of you. My name is 𝗵𝗵𝗂𝗃𝗀𝗃. I'm head of 𝗵𝗊𝗇 China and China Political Director for Danish Industry. Today, we are going to talk about what I believe is a very interesting and current topic. China's employment situation is looking increasingly muddled as labor shortage in manufacturing is mixed with high youth unemployment. Abundant labor supply has been a key feature of China's industrialization. But now there is a tendency that aging migrant workers are creating a factory labor shortage, preferring to work for a large amount of them in less demanding service jobs. At the same time, youth unemployment is at a record high in China or somewhere in that vicinity, because we don't actually know the specific data right now. Some statistic formula have changed a little bit, but we'll ask Miriam about what the current status is. But according to some estimates, nearly 1 in 4 people under the age of 25 are unemployed. The problem is particularly severe among college graduates. Almost 60% of young people are advancing to higher learning institutions in China, and despite dire job prospects, few of them are apparently willing to turn to manufacturing to redeem that problem. So in this webinar, we will examine the causes and the consequences of these bottlenecks in China's labor market. And to help us shed light on the situation, I'm very pleased to introduce 3 distinguished guests with deep experience from labor relations in China. Ladies first, of course, I'm so happy that you are here physically. It's been a while since we had guests in the studio here. So Miriam Wirkenheim, General Manager at Direct HR, a very welcome to you. Miriam is a German national. She holds a double degree in Asia Studies and Economics, a well-recognized capacity in the HR service industry, and a frequent speaker at prestigious organizations in China. Welcome, Miriam.
Happy to be here.
Then we have sitting at the offices, actually also here in Shanghai for a change. All of us 4 speakers are in the same city. Alfred Gan, Managing Director, Country Head at 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀 China. Alfred is a Chinese national with more than 15 years of experience in B2B professional services. He leads 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀's team of 200 professionals across China, providing HR, other professional services, accounting, and so forth to international companies. As we say in these events here, that full disclosure that 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀 is also Danish Industry's partner in China. So that's of course also why we are very happy that Alfred can join us here today. Well, welcome to you as well, Alfred. Last but definitely not least, Nikolaj Bro-Winkel, who is the Country Managing Director at 𝗂𝗵𝗴𝗏. Nikolaj is a Danish national with more than 25 years of experience. Was it 25 years ago since we met the first time, Nikolaj, here in Shanghai? So he has a long history of working in China, is now heading the global animal health company 𝗂𝗵𝗏𝗏's activities in Greater China. Nikolaj has previously worked in executive positions for several large corporates, including Maersk Shipping, that I'm sure most people here would know about. And Nikolaj has also been a co-owner of a HR company that has been working specifically with some of these issues we're going to talk about today in the discussion. But a warm welcome to all 3 of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to help us out today and shed some light on this topic. But before moving on to the discussion, Miriam, you have promised that you will set the scene by offering the very latest insights and some data about China's labor market situation. What's happening right now with salary levels, turnover rate? Is it going up or down? What's the situation?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Peter, and hello, everybody. Good morning back home. Happy to be here today. Thanks also for the nice introduction. As you heard, my name is Miriam, and I'm a recruiter. I'm a headhunter. We focus on the DACH, German-speaking, Scandinavian, and Benelux companies. And what I do most of the time, I go and visit their factories and I go and visit their offices. So I really have a lot of first-hand feedback from the general managers, the managing directors here in China, and hear what's on their heart, what's on their soul, and what's happening for their business. And maybe to just set the scene a little bit, as you said, and create an overview, let me maybe go from the big picture to the small picture. And the big picture, of course, starts with a more muted global demand that we've been having for some time. This also has been reflective in the China market. So we have had a local slowdown, and the main challenges that most of Western companies, but also Chinese companies in China are facing are a very, very intense price pressure, a really intense price pressure. And then if you're a foreign company, then you're also probably struggling or you're competing against the Chinese competition. You probably always did because this is China, but what has really changed is that the Chinese competition has improved dramatically in terms of quality of their products. So while your products objectively may still be better, the Chinese competitor often enough is good enough, and at the same time still a lot more competitively priced. And so this is one of the main challenges that almost across the board all companies are facing. Some companies, some industries worse than others. For example, automotive industry is very, very tricky right now. So that is one of the issues. And what does it mean? That means the main challenge for Western companies right now is a cost-saving challenge, and also how to stay competitive, how to localize, how to become leaner, to really keep their market share. And cost saving also includes HR, and now we are turning around to the HR topic. So at the moment, cost saving in HR we often see in the forms of layoffs. So layoffs have been happening in the last couple of years and continue to happen across the board. We see these cost cuttings in layoffs, but also in how the employees are treated. And maybe let me talk a little bit about the different kinds of employees. So we have, for example, the junior employees. That would be everybody who graduated from university. To give you a number, we have somewhere there about 8 million Chinese graduates who graduate with a bachelor each year and are looking for a job. So just the amount of young students hitting the labor market is quite high. And then we also have the catch-up from the previous years. They're called the COVID graduates. It's not a nice word, but some employers have been shown to have some concerns hiring them because they said, oh, the classes were online. Maybe they missed out on some social skills. We rather wait for the next year. So not only do we have 8 million graduates per year, but we also have a little bit of a catch-up from the previous year. So indeed, youth unemployment of bachelor graduates is very, very high. The Chinese government has indeed started to reassess last year how to calculate. I remember there was a little bit of an uproar in Western media who said it's so bad. They want to hide the numbers, but they actually did update the formula, how it is calculated and how they did update it. That also did make sense. So it was, in my personal opinion, not to hide anything. It was just also a correction that maybe had an unfortunate timing, but was necessary nonetheless. So about 25%, that sounds reasonable if it's not more. So if you're looking for junior employees at the moment, that should be quite easy. We also see a lot of junior employees moving from big cities like Shanghai or Beijing into their smaller cities because the cost of living here is quite high. Then we are moving on, let's go to the senior employees, to executive employees. So those would be executive, your GM, your director, your VP. These employees are also quite struggling at the moment. These employees usually are expensive, and it's not that they have shown underperformance, but a lot of companies felt they have not been performing well because the company performance has not been good. And who gets blamed? The executives, the GM or the MD gets blamed. So a lot of them, especially also the Chinese ones, have been asked to leave. And at the moment, this is still a market that's very stuck. So if you're looking for a Chinese senior executive at the moment, you also still have a good selection of candidates you can pick for at very affordable prices, so to say. And then, of course, we also have foreigners. So foreigners in China have drastically reduced. I think the highest amount of foreigners we ever had in China was somewhere around 2015 or so, at about 178,000 foreigners. So this is everybody who is not a Chinese passport holder. And then in the last year, 2024, we were down to 91,000 non-Chinese passport holders, according to official data. So that's a drastic drop. And then of those, more than half are from developing countries. So more than half of this already smaller number of foreigners comes from countries like Vietnam, Myanmar, and Laos, which is geographically, if you look at China map, they're all here around Yunnan province. So it's landlocked, so they can literally walk in, if you will. And individuals, foreigners from these countries, they tend to be quite low educated and working in very low level jobs and very low salary jobs. So like on a farm or very harsh manufacturing. And so that again leaves the Western foreigners like you, for example, or us really here. It's a fairly low amount who is left. And normally everybody would say, but Miriam, if all the foreigners left and there's nobody here, it should be really easy for a foreigner who's still here to find a new job, isn't it? But unfortunately, that's not true. So what is the case is that we've seen waves of layoffs also for, not only for Chinese executives, but also foreign executives. Foreigners in China tend to have management positions. And again, the business didn't perform well, so they let the manager go, even also when that was a foreigner. And these foreigners who are still here are at the moment quite hard pressed to find a new job. So again, if you're currently looking for a foreign GM, a foreign MD, a foreign executive, it's a buyer's market. So you can find very qualified candidates at the moment that is going quite well. And so that all doesn't sound so bad, does it? It sounds like for us as companies, like a candy store. But there are two types of profiles which are actually more in demand. And the first type of profile is the mid-level managers, Chinese mid-level managers. So you have, for example, your team leader or maybe a head of department, especially in functions like a sales manager, maybe a production manager, operation, finance, HR, so on this level, especially if they have a technical background, especially if they speak English well, then these candidates are the ones that companies are hiring at the moment. So for those, if you want to hire those candidates, then you are with much more competition, because they can be a little bit picky. You will have to work harder to attract them to your business. Candidates at the moment, and also Chinese in general, are fairly risk adverse when it comes to this, and they've had some bad experience with companies performing poorly here in China. So there is more of a competition going on in that particular bracket, and these candidates can be more picky. One good news I have from our business is that at the moment, a lot of our clients are hiring what we call growth positions. So growth means they hire salespeople, business development people, maybe customer service people. And just 2 years ago, everybody was hiring what I call optimization positions. So optimizations positions are those who take what's there and make it leaner and cheaper, right? But now it's again to growth positions. So I think that's a positive sign for the market. So at the moment, I would say half of our portfolio is somewhere between sales manager to sales general manager, sales director. And I think that's a good sign for hopefully for this year. The second candidate bracket that is also a challenge for many Western firms are indeed blue-collar workers. So we are not blue-collar workers need. I think the main challenge is that first of all, they are not necessarily where they should be, especially on the east side of the country in the business areas, Yangtze River Delta, Zhejiang, Jiangsu province. So they can be sometimes somewhere else. And there's also a little bit of a challenge that as companies move up in terms of their production processes and how they automate their production processes, blue-collar workers need to be better. So it's not just like 20 years ago, you take A and stick it into B, and everybody can do it. Now a blue-collar worker has to operate a machine. So if you need to operate a CNC grinding machine with a touchpad, which is in English, and it's very difficult work, so that is just also the requirements for blue-collar workers are increasing. So there's a constant need for blue-collar workers. And companies, this is not new, companies have been facing it, and the solution is automation. So that is what the general consensus is. So in general, it's an employer market. That means you as a company can decide, can afford to be picky for most candidates' profiles, except for blue-collar workers and those coveted qualified mid-level managers. At the same time, because the market is very uneven at the moment and cost saving is very important, we see still companies laying off others. Salary increases are quite low. So salary increases in China historically have been high year on year, even if you had the same employee in the same job, no promotion, no extra work, they would get somewhere 10% was not unusual, but at least 5, 6, 7, 8% more. I've seen some salary reports for this year that officially said it's suggested to increase salary between 3.5 and 4.5%. To be very honest, if you give nothing, most employees will be fine. Employees understand how the current market is, and many employees, quite frankly, are happy to keep their job. So I would recommend identify 80-20 rule, identify your 20%, which is really making a difference in your company, and give them a salary increase. And everybody, if you give them a little bit, that should be sufficient. And I would have a few more things to say. Actually, no, just one more thing to say, because I don't want to take too much time before we open to questions also and let the other partners speak. It is very important for the Chinese government to have as many people employed as possible. The China labor law is very protective of employees. It's easy to hire. It's very difficult to let go. It's also very expensive to let somebody go. And this is always the case. So for example, if I hire you, you're Chinese, if I hire you, and then after 2 years I let you go, I have to pay you severance, which would be 2 months your salary at minimum. At minimum, maybe it's double that. And even if I give you a short-term labor contract and I don't renew it, I also have to pay. So even if you just give a contract, you don't renew it, you still have to pay severance. So this has always been the case. What is new, it's not new, but what companies are facing now are preferences and regulations which are strongly enforced, that especially if you're outside of the big cities, if you're in Taicang, in Nantong, in Kunshan, in these other areas, if you want to let go a significant percentage of your staff, maybe 20% or so, you cannot just do that freely. You have to apply to the local government to let these people go in that amount, and then they will have the requirement that you need to show why, and the reason needs to be you can prove that for the last 2 or 3 years you've been in the red. So it means you've been making no profit. And if you cannot prove this, you will not get the confirmation that you can let the people go. So I know some companies who, if they're smaller, and currently the situation is challenging, they would need to let the people go, but they cannot let the people go. And so that's a little bit between a rock and a hard place. So that depends on the location you're in. But this is something to be aware of. So in China, you cannot just let half your people go without any consequences.
Thank you so much. They're very, very useful to to get a baseline about what's going on here. I think a lot of these things we'll delve more into. What I also hear you say is, for all of us out here, we should really hold on to our jobs.
Please hold on. That's what I say. I'm like, even if you're not happy, hold on to your job. Wait until next year. Yeah.
But as I said, some of the specific data you are bringing to the table, we'll get into that, and I think it will also be important to get some perspectives on that. But, today, a key issue here is also we want to take it up a notch and say, well, this is a challenge that we have, but it's one of many challenges in China. Every day, for those of us who work with China on a professional level, we hear China's economy is not doing well. There are all kinds of problems and things, and we should just cross our fingers and hope for the best. Would it be too much to say that and I also would like to bring in the other two. We start with you, Miriam, that based on your observations and experiences, is it fair to say that a diminishing labor force is the main threat to China's manufacturing sector, or is it just one of many?
I would say that's a good question. I would say it's the main threat in the middle or long term. I think today, local economy, global economy, geopolitics, a certain president in a certain country are concerning more because it's more immediate. But the labor force, the demographic development, we have an aging society. Women have not enough children anymore. The silver economy is booming, growing old before growing big. It's a big challenge. And at the same time, as the industries here mature, if you think about it historically, textile and electronic components were the first industries who came to China many, many years ago. And now we have chemical, pharmaceutical, we have AI, we have robotics. So just the qualifications that the average employees needs have really increased. And that's a mismatch together with the shrinking workforce.
I would also very much like to hear, Alfred, your take on that, because you are as I said, you're the head of a climate business here in China, but at the same time, 𝗀𝗋 is also a company that is being very active on other Asian markets. We have been following it. A recurring theme in these webinars is the China plus one factor. Having a presence in China, but also looking at what's going on in the rest of the region, especially perhaps from a manufacturing perspective. Are there other places where we can move production? So when we talk about this thing about manufacturing and the bottlenecks that are there, are you agreeing with what you see and hear from Miriam, or are there other challenges? What's your take?
Yeah. So the first, to respond to this question, if diminishing labor force is a key reason for China to lose our manufacturing dominance, I think it's yes, but not be the most critical, because actually I was born like in 1918, because one child policy should actually effective from 1977, something like that. So actually our available labor force, if we are talking about the adults between like 19 to 59, actually it's decreasing. I think 10 or even 15 years ago, the growth rate is decreasing. So so the total available labor force, it's not like a dramatic decreasing. Plus, actually, we opened multiple kids from 2015. Actually, our growth rate will be increased a little bit till 2035. But after that, recent years, our birth rate is near 1. And this in the recent 3 years, we have a lower than 10 million new births, the new kids, new infants. So the real impact of a decreasing labor force should be happened, I think it's after 2035. So I would say it's really fair to say diminishing labor force is a key threat. But actually, yes, China is losing some like the manufacturing competition. Actually, we have the office, we have the foreign company established subsidiaries in whole Asia. We also have the office in Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia. I think that's for multiple reasons. First, it's I think the labor cost is increasing. That's true. I think that's due to different reasons. Because first, the industrial transformation, our labor is flowing from the agriculture to industry. Now it's to service. And if you want to hire someone, you have to pay much more to retain the people in this industry. That means industrial. Secondly, it's the willingness of working in a factory. Definitely, it's decreasing. We can talk a little bit more later. That's because the mindset is changing. Some indirect reason, I would say, let's for the working condition improvement. I think the labels, the staff is benefited from this. For foreign company, I said, okay, it's always very compliant. But for the Chinese companies, it's increased indirectly their costs. Like they can't really squeeze long hours at what they did 20 years ago. So it's right now. I think it's, if we are talking about 2010, all our clients will see definitely China is the first place if we want to establish a factory. But right now, I don't think that's still, I think it's a key place. They establish something, but also they have a lot of more options like Vietnam, like India, like Indonesia. Very frankly, we don't see a lot of companies. They fully quit China because they still rely on the skill label, the logistics, the supply chain. But we see more and more clients that they are not owning established factory or manufacturing center in China. Probably will choose China and Vietnam or China with Thailand as their first place of Asia. So that's the observation from my side. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. We'll get back to that thing about actually, where are the manufacturing jobs moving, if they are moving out of China, what's going to happen in the future. But Nikolai, I would also like to bring you in here. When you're sitting and having management meetings with the bosses back home and you're talking about, things are a little bit challenging in China right now, does the topic of labor shortage in manufacturing ever appear? Or how do you see, what is the relative weight of this problem we're talking about here?
It's probably not even in the top 5, to be perfectly honest. I think Miriam, she mentioned it a little bit earlier, that maybe the most serious struggle that many foreign companies that actually do sales and have China as a market. One of the biggest issue is the increasing domestic competition from Chinese manufacturers, Chinese companies, where quality is close to comparable, but price point is significantly lower. That's at least that's what we struggle with the most. Especially if you have a portfolio, and some companies do, I'm sure other people on the call as well, where a certain part of your products are actually manufactured in China by Chinese manufacturer, and then you have your own products also that you manufacture in other places. We now see a situation where companies, Chinese companies, because export volumes, certainly to a place like USA, where the geopolitical situation, you already have tariffs on a number of different products. So if you have a Chinese manufacturer who before had USA as one of their bigger market, if this market is now more or less closed for them, well, they still have the factory equipment. It still needs to run at full capacity. If you can't export to USA, you already export as much as you can to Europe. Well, then you have to sell it domestically, right? And we see a situation where you almost subsidize and you sell below cost, or at least below what we think is cost, simply because the machines have to run anyway, right? So I think that's a struggle that a lot of companies that actually has China as a market encounter.
I would like to, again, if we stay on the topic of the labor shortage, because there are also these other issues that, of course, relevant factors on what the problems we see right now. But labor shortages in manufacturing is not something that's specific only for China. It's also it's a present concern in many countries. In Denmark, we're talking about it a lot. If you hear my boss, the CEO of the Danish Industri, he will say that has been Denmark's main concern in recent years, that we don't have access to enough skilled labor, especially for the manufacturing industry. These kind of problems, these kind of concerns are often caused by structural imbalances, but they can also have other origins. Well, what you were a little bit mentioning this before, and we have talked about demographic developments that are not going China's way, but what are the key underlying factors in China? Do you see?
Yeah, some underlying factors, but maybe because I really agree also with what Alfred said, and also what Nikolai said. So at the moment, labor shortages are not our main problem, but only because we have really, really big other problems. The moment economy picks up, this comes back. The moment economy picks up, and usually in China, everything happens at the same time. So so within the same, let's say 2 or 3 months, maybe half a year, it's going to pick up in whenever that is in several industries at the same time. And what do? They all start recruiting because they say, okay, we have more business, let's start recruiting. And so the problem of worker shortage is going to come back with a big force. We just don't know when. But regarding to your question, yeah, so we have certainly the demographic situation that at the moment it's not the biggest problem, but it is a problem nonetheless. We have regional clustering, so those migrant workers and really low-level, low-educated employees, where their form tends to be from the middle of China or more from the west of China. But where they're needed is in South China and then along the East Coast and in the Yangtze River, Pearl River Delta, so in those cluster areas. So they are not necessarily from there. So it's more difficult to keep them there. So I know a lot of companies, they go through a lot of pain. They provide housing, they provide some schooling options for the children. They have summer schools. That means in their factory, they clear out one of the warehouse areas and then have some kindergarten teachers to take care of the kids of the migrant workers when they're in school, when they're not in school, when they're in summer holiday, so that mom and dad can work during this time, right? Because social network is not where the factories are. We also have, as I said, the increase of requirements, where it used to be just very simple manufacturing, standing on a conveyor belt, put A into B, as I said, and now it's quite more demanding. One of the big issues, however, that we face is that it's considered unattractive. And I think that's the main issue. So in China, there's this
unattractive to work in a factory.
In a factory, so everybody, that's right. So everybody wants to improve their life, and it's also so we call it face, right? Like face, like your face. You want to gain face by having a higher title, a higher position. You want to advance yourself in life. And on the shop floor, there's not much face on shop floor. So it is less attractive if your parents, they would not want their children to be a blue-collar worker. They will really push and nudge and finance and take personal sacrifice to educate this child or to buy education for this child, to not be on the shop floor, but to go to the level up. So it's called, it's considered unattractive. This is also, we have a major imbalance between male and female. And the number one group of individuals who cannot find a partner are men who have a low education, right? So it's considered less attractive. And so it all belongs together. So all the parents say, we don't want you to be a blue collar, we want you to be better. If they're already a blue collar, they want to improve themselves. So it is just considered unattractive. A lot of my clients cooperate, for example, with the German Chamber of Commerce, maybe offer this too, vocational trainings, where classes are provided for free for 3 years, together with working in a company at the same time. It's all covered, paid, and then there's a guaranteed job offer at the end for everybody who passes. But then the people still don't want to take it because they want to then try to get some other education and then moving from blue collar into more of a lower management or white collar role because that's socially attractive. So I think that's one of the main issues.
Can you also recognize this, Alfred, from what you've been seeing throughout your years? I mean, one of the big advantages of China's industrial sector has always been this flexibility, mobility. People are willing to move from places to places in millions of numbers, stay at the dormitory, work at the factory, as long as the salary is a little bit higher than the one in the other province. But now this development perhaps is no longer, people want something else. And especially the younger generations, of course, but even in tier 2 and tier 3, more poorer areas of China, working for manufacturing, working at a factory is not so cool anymore. Is that also what you see?
Yes. So it's given my personal experience or observation, or talked with my family. Also, I'm original from a small village. Then I moved to Shenzhen with my parents. So let's close to end of 1990, 1995, something like that. at that moment, I feel it's. I think that's several reasons. It's so many people. They go to the big city because at that moment, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, the urbanization rate in China is like 20%. We have been told like when I was like 10, 15, that's still 70% people is living in the small village or the countryside. But not everyone at that moment. I think first, the urbanization, it's the nature consequence when your economy is booming. You have two options from a small city to the big city because the big city still was very appealing. First, you get your bachelor degree, but not everyone can do that. Second, it's you go to there, work in a factory that's probably near Shanghai, in South China, or near Beijing. So at that moment, 20 years ago, a lot of people is waiting to take that job. Like, okay, I probably sacrifice. It's not super proud of that work in a factory, but still better than work as a peasant. That's probably true for most of the family. So they went to South China, Shenzhen. They go to Yangtze Delta River. They work in the factory. But the 20 years after that, it's I feel it's this as you said first. Right now we are a little bit of reverse urbanization. People is going back to small city. Secondly, it's something. There's a lot of competitions with factory hiring right now. If you also spend time in China, you know is how the deliveries is developed right now. You can order anything within 30 minutes. If I need some bottle of water, or I need just some like the fast foods, I need a proper meal. You just to click in some apps, you can get these meals. It's within, I think the fastest is 30 minutes. So I think it's half of the people I look in the street, it's the deliveries. So it's if you talk with some generation Z to compare to work as a delivery or work as a worker in a factory, I think more than half they will choose the delivery because they still feel the factory is something firstly very hierarchy. You don't have any flexibility, freedom. Even you work as delivery, you can still control your time. I want to work 8 hours. I earn because you have an hourly rate. I only want to work 3 hours. I can just stay in the street smoking with my friends. You can also do that. You accept that. But they don't have this freedom, flexibility in the factory. That means their willingness to enter, to start working in a factory, it's continues to decreasing. Another thing is probably, for me as a Chinese, I know this very well. It's in around 2000, that means 25 years ago. That's very few people can go to the college. That means 10% people of young generation, they can get a bachelor degrees. But after that, I think at that moment, our government is promote like we encourage more people to go to the college, university to have a decent diploma. The people can go to college. This ratio is suddenly increased to 50%, something like that, after 10 years. So that means, but this direction is pushing people to the white collar. That means I prefer to major in accounting or some economy or whatever, but I want to work in an office, even in the cubic. The salary is not always high as a white blue collar, but they feel that's like the 𝗵𝗯𝘂𝗂𝗄 said, that's more face. But in China, it didn't develop a lot for the vocational education. That means you send a lot of people to the as a white collar. Then the people they know nothing. They didn't go to college or they didn't go to the vocational education. Right now we need some skilled labor force. So that means that people they doesn't have work, but for factory they have the problem hiring the skilled labor or with more high quality workers. I think that's my observation. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because what you're saying is basically that it's a structural imbalance. I mean, of course, some of the developments we've seen in many other countries, it's also just getting richer. Then you want something more, and the parents want the kids to move up the chain or whatever you want to call it. But if we compare, for instance, with Denmark, yes, there's also a low labor shortage problem, but that's also because there's full employment in general in the overall economy. The other side of this coin, and what's interesting, perhaps Nikolai, you also have some comments on that. The interesting part here is that there are so many unemployed young people, and that choose that instead of actually taking a job for a while in a factory or whatever, then they choose to lie flat or Taiping or something like that. Isn't that because China, isn't that a wrong direction? What do you think, Nicolai?
No, but I think it's something you see in many different countries. Both Alfred and Miriam mentioned it. There's not a lot of status in being a blue collar worker, but it kind of goes hand in hand, because typically when we refer to a blue collar worker right now, it is literally putting gadget A into gadget B, right? But that's changing, right? You don't need a lot of education to just do that. But as it is changing, whether it's to adjust an AI routine or input it on a panel or whatever, that's going to require a different type of skills, which also means that, if you require your workers to have this kind of skills, you will also need to pay a higher salary. So the issue is that it's obviously not very well paid to be in manufacturing doing the very basic assembly work, right? Which means that you are certainly not going to attract somebody who has a college degree or a university degree. It just makes sense, right? But as manufacturing is going to start requiring higher skills, they will also need to pay more money. There's a chance, there's a decent chance at least, that it's not going to be looked down upon the way it is today by young people, right? I think the entire issue is that, I think Germany, and now Miriam is here, Germany and Denmark actually as well, has a very good tradition for vocational training. It is not looked down upon, you being a auto mechanic or a welder, for instance, because that requires great skill, right? And this is a very important point, you can make the same money as somebody who's sitting in an office, spending most of the time on Teams meeting and making PowerPoint presentations. So I think some of this is actually going to solve itself as the skills required in manufacturing are going up, salaries will go up. It's hopefully going to start attracting some of these people. But the government has already done some things, to promote vocational training. They have put, programs in place. But I think there's also a marketing aspect to this. It's going to be, you have to present working in manufacturing in a light, in a manner that actually is going to start sounding a little bit more attractive. I think it's sort of two-pronged. Yes, you need to obviously get people trained in vocational skills, but you also need to market this as not being something that you look down upon, right?
Something else I would like to mention, and this is indeed what we see in many, many countries. So there's something called a social promise that says if you work really hard, you will increase in your life. You work really hard, you get a promotion, you buy your first car, you buy your first apartment, maybe you buy a bigger apartment, you have a nice holiday, and so on and so on. And this social promise has been broken in many countries. The reason is inflation, cost of living has been increasing. I can't see anybody else. I don't know what age group you're in, but probably the house your parents bought was significantly easier to pay in years of their salary at that time than if you today buy a house and how many years of your salary you need for that house, right? So this social promise has been broken. This is why globally we have some problems, and this is also true in China. So in China, to own a house, a property, an apartment, not a house in the garden, but an apartment, is extremely important. So if you are a man, you can almost not get married without an apartment. I cannot overemphasize, Alfred is smiling and nodding, but I cannot overemphasize how important that is. The parents of the girlfriend will block the wedding if the man doesn't have a house. So usually then nowadays the families, they try to get together. Very important. And what has been increasing like crazy in the last 20 years are apartment prices. So there's also a big frustration that young people have, even if I do it right, even if I work very hard, I study very hard, I do everything how I'm supposed to be, I will never be able to get the social promise upon me. So I will not be able to progress in my life. And so that's very, very frustrating. So at the moment, maybe the real estate industry in China is quite dark. But also, I think what objectively we have to look at is that China has been a developing country, and really real estate made up to 30% of GDP. But for developed countries, which China is now, real estate makes somewhere 15 to 20%. So there also has to be a reduction. Prices at the moment are reducing, so maybe there's some kind of balance. So I think number one is the social promise, so that many people just don't see the point anymore. Why should I sacrifice so much if I don't get what is promised to me? And number two is there's wealth in families. Chinese household savings are very high. The average household saves somewhere between 30 to 40% of their income, and have been for years and years and years. And of course, I know some households are very poor, maybe they cannot save. But saving, China is not a society like America, for example, live on credit cards. Chinese is a society that saves a lot. So for a lot of kids, the parents are able to support them through a life-flat phase, for example. A lot of children are going to inherit 1 or 2 or 3 apartments. I think that is something we often don't consider, that even if the value of the apartment has been reducing, a lot of the children who are now my age or younger, I'm 42, so or younger than that, they will inherit soon. So they have a buffer.
So what you're saying is the incentive to go out there and take the loan is not that high, because there's going to be money coming in at some point. You're not under the same kind of pressure for your retirement, for whatever. If something happens, that, for instance, your parents' generation was out here, and that will also happen. Exactly, right.
Build it up, yeah. And one last point, if I may, I do a lot of pro bono mentoring for young Chinese as well, and I always ask them the same question: what do you want? And most of the times they say, I want to be a manager, I want to have money, I want to be financially successful. And now what they say is, I want to work for a good company, I want to have value, and I want to have purpose. And that is also something I think personally related to COVID. If you have young teenage kids right now, you will hear them in psychology words talking to each other. This is something that has really taken the social media also in China. And so this value-driven, purpose-driven expectation that they have, that is new. And then I don't know what, they don't feel there's value in manufacturing the little parts inside of your cell phone, So that is also something that we see that is new.
Can you recognize that picture, Alfred, that the young people of China are not as hungry as their parents was in terms of, I need to get out there, I need to make some money, because I also want to live a life that's valuable and do the right things, a little bit like the Western developments over the last many years. Can you recognize that picture too?
The first, I think China is so big. It's also the development. Also, it's including the mindset development is quite uneven. But if you are asking about tendency, especially in some more developed area like Shanghai, Beijing, or South China, I think the first reason is because they are. When I grow up, my parents is something like they just passed some miserable time in China. That means they came from very poor family. So the only way is they work very hard. But for this generation, I think first, why they lose the motivation, I think probably first, they already have a lot of things. They have much more than I was young. So that's the first thing. When you grow up in a wealthy family, I think it's definitely probably earning money. It's not something, it's the most important. You're asking the purpose. So if you look at the children in Shanghai, I don't see any difference between them with the kids that grow up in Tokyo or in Copenhagen or in New York. They also need some right now also I learned some very new concept from my young cousins, gap. Like after university, at my age, the first important thing foremost is get an internship immediately, earn money. Otherwise, I will just lose the starting point. But for them, that's, I need a break gap for 1 year. I can travel Yunnan or Africa to whatever they want. So as the first is the wealthy level is different. The secondly also is I talked with some younger staff. Maybe they are not from a super wealthy family, but their reason is right now. That means that our economy, it's difficult to create the miracle in China. That means if you born like 1980, then you are suddenly to have the China enter WTO. Our economy is booming. If you bought 1 or 2 apartments in Shanghai, you are so lucky. Or the stock market also, it's very good. You can invest a lot. But right now, it's the young generation said we don't have the opportunity be like our parents. So the ROI is decreasing. If you also pay a lot of time, effort on the work, but you don't get paid off finally. I think like the Tokyo, in Japan, I think they have the same issue after 1990. It's like they are also lay flat. I see a little bit same tendency for the Chinese young generation. They are not as hard as my generation or my parents' generation, because first they already have a lot of things. Secondly, they feel working maybe not the only way for their to upgrade their lifestyle. So that's my just point of view.
Thanks, Evan. I just want to, there's a question here that I guess goes to what you were saying before about the social promises. What can Chinese companies or the Chinese government do to keep the social promises? What is needed? And actually, that the whole role of government here, China's government, all of this, what can be done from either the business management side or from the government side to change this pattern that we're talking about?
You're putting me on the spot. Let me say that in the most diplomatic way possible. China has a different political system than we have in Europe. And that also means China has different priorities. At the same time, social harmony, let's call it social harmony, is one of the top priorities because it guarantees that the political system continues to work out in very simple terms. That means, for example, state-owned enterprises called SOEs, a lot of them are very, very, very big. They employ so many people, but often then if you look at them objectively, you say they're not very efficient, they're not very process-driven, and they don't make profit. But we have to understand one of the main objectives of, for example, state-owned enterprises is to keep people employed and have a job and be very stable and be very safe. And maybe they don't earn so much nominally, but there are a lot of benefits. The same is true for some government workers. So they may have a slow pace of working. There's a regular promotion going on, but it's not as exciting, and not as best practice driven as in international companies. But it's very safe and it meets the social need. So what the Chinese government can do, and what I think we will see, is to continue job creation, whereas maybe not all jobs are as necessary as you could strictly say, but they will be sometimes also created for the sake of job creation, to give people a regular income, to have people not be on the street unemployed and then not knowing what to do, to give them structure, because that is important for social harmony. So I would assume that we see that this continues. Besides that, adjusting education, it also used to be, when I came to China 17, almost 18 years ago, everybody was studying engineering and finance because their parents said, that's good for the economy and you will surely find a job. And then even if the students wanted to study art, they studied engineering. And now if they want to study art, they study art. And so there's also more emancipation, that young students now, they study what they want to study, not always, but comparatively more than before. And it's missing the degrees that China needs. So I would also assume we will see more students being encouraged to study again something that is actually needed on the market.
I would like to stay also on this topic, of what government is doing and can do. Nikolai, in Denmark, we're very proud of what we call the Danish model, which means that from a company's perspective, it's fairly easy to hire and fire. We have a flexicurity system, we call it. It's flexible when it comes to hiring and firing, but there's also security. provided by the state, by the welfare state, if you are laid off. But here in China it's different. Miriam, you mentioned before that actually one of the big burdens on employers is all the severance payments, all that. Nikolai, I want to ask you, you're Danish, but now you are employing a bunch of Chinese local people here in China. Do you feel that this is also really a hampering factor, that whenever you hire Chinese people, young people, that there are also very tough rules if you need to get rid of them again?
It's definitely a consideration. So that's one thing. That it used to be also in previous companies I worked with, where the fact that a woman would possibly get pregnant during her, or was close to the marrying age and pregnancy age, maybe meant that a male candidate would have a higher priority for this company. I don't think it just means that you are being more careful in your selection process. You obviously you don't want to fire people when you hire them. You hire them with the intention of keeping them for a long time. Obviously, economical situations can change, and you might have to. But I don't think necessarily. The only thing it has done is that you're just really careful when you hire. You make sure that you put the candidates through the necessary tests, numerous interviews, background checks, etc. So you hire for the duration, ideally, right?
But I mean, this is an area where the government could do something very concrete. They could perhaps reduce the burden on companies a little bit, but it may not happen. But
if so, in the other direction.
Yeah,
it's more important for the government to have people employed than to have your company to be profitable.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're quickly running out of time, but there is still one question I would really like to dig into before the end here. You mentioned it in the introduction. What about us foreigners? And it's going down. There are a lot of people here in the audience who are either working as foreigners in China or thinking about whatever. And you mentioned it. There are getting fewer and fewer of us here in China, but COVID has been one of those reasons that many people moved back during the pandemic, because it was difficult to get in and out of China. There have also been other barriers. Could the development not turn again, or was that just it? The golden era for foreigners working in China is definitively over.
Well, if I could see into the future, wouldn't that be nice? I think at the moment, if you're working in China and you have a job, I would. And even if you just came out of Chinese New Year, even if you didn't get your bonus, even if you're not happy with your boss or somebody, I would encourage you to hold on to your job right now and do not make a short-term decision to just up and quit and think you find something else. If you're currently looking for a job and you're already in China, I would encourage you to be realistic about your financial obligations that you have and put your expectation long. I would encourage you to put a 1-year expectation. Because if you think, maybe you've been here a long time, and then it used to be very quick, it will not be very quick. At the moment, the competition amongst foreigners in China for the very few jobs that are available is incredibly high. We see salaries dropping for foreigners. So the typical Dutch, 𝗏, Benelux, GM, let's say maybe 50 years old, mid-50s for a manufacturing company somewhere here, had a salary of somewhere between 1.5 to 2.5 million renminbi gross, all in. So including everything. I think that's very similar in Danish kroner. I learned that once that Danish kroner and renminbi are very similar, so between 1.5 and 2.5. And so the same candidates today, they are competing for jobs who are 1.1, maybe 1.2 in salary all in. And that also includes the bonus. To just give you an idea how fierce the competition is, and it has dropped in salary expectations. If you are outside of China, I would encourage you to maybe apply to 𝗵𝗿𝗄𝗏 here, or if you want to work around China, also what Alfred said, China +1 is still a big topic. Maybe go to one of those countries where perspective-wise for your company in the future, you can foster the cooperation between Denmark and China and country X, such as Thailand.
Those will have to be the last words. Whether they are encouraging or not, I'm not so sure. But that is the situation. We are out of time, so I have to say thank you so much for a very interesting and engaging session. And there are actually several more questions in the commentary field that we didn't even get to. That's sometimes how it is. But I hope you have all enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. And once again, a special thanks to Miriam, to Alfred, to Nikolai for taking the time and for your valuable contributions today. Since China's activities continue at full steam, our upcoming webinars include topics as diverse as ESG regulations, Thailand's growth potential, and a review of the first 100 days of Donald Trump's second term. That's coming up in May, that one. If some of you in the audience are not already members of DI Since China, please get on board by sending me an email or a WeChat message. As always, Since China's mission is to provide balanced perspectives and insights on how developments in China and its neighboring region are impacting the Danish business sector. So, thank you so much. See you all next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.